In my opinion, anyone who's spending time or money driving traffic to their website link through Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Google, wherever, you may as well be burning money. I swear to God, you may as well be doing this. And why? Well, shit landing pages. I mean, imagine this. You have a beautiful storefront. Everybody wants to come inside. They walk through the door and they get met with a maze. They have to navigate this complicated maze to even make it to the front desk. What do you think is going to happen? People are going to leave. They aren't even going to try and make it through the maze. And if they do, they're going to get lost. And this is exactly what you're doing with your website landing page. And how do you know you've got a bad landing page or a shit website? Well, like the title of the video says, you're not making any money. Or even worse, you're practically burning money, time, and your ad spend, giving it to platforms like Facebook, only for customers to click your link, land on a mess, and bounce. And we'll talk more about what bouncing is later. And the thing is, we know we've got a good website because it makes money. I'm Jordan from Island Web Design, and in this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 reasons your website isn't making money and how to fix it. And in the last 18 months, when I've grown Island Web Design to over 100 clients, we've turned around countless business websites, so I know exactly what I'm talking about on this subject. And where do you think all Island Web Design's money comes from? Our website. We've had a new website like 4 times since Island Web Design launched, and each time we're optimizing it more and more, just getting that conversion rate up, working out what's effective, and obviously we're learning from what we're doing. I'll go, last time the website had this and had that, and this happened, and this time we've done this and that happened, and we can get a good insight from that. And then we ultimately take all that insight and use it in our clients' websites to turn them around as well. And the first reason is more questions than answers. Now, believe it or not, when people come to me and say there's a problem with their website, it's not converting, or people are getting lost, or nobody's even clicking on it in the first place, normally the problem is not a bad design or something wrong with the coding or whatever. The problem is actually it's not clear. You land on this site, you've got no idea what it's about, or you might be like, oh, bicycles, but what about them? You're going to transform my home? Well, how? Why? Like, in what way are you going to transform my home? So you really do need to be clear and make sure that when people land on this website, they actually understand what they just landed on and what you want them to do. Island Web Design. There is no fucking mistaking what we do. Don't let people mistake what you do with these vague names that are like good, catchy marketing taglines, but don't actually mean anything. Yeah, so like I say, it's actually all about clarity, and to really drive this point home, Alex Hormozi literally says in his marketing video that he spends 80 cents of his advertising dollar and 80% of his time and effort on the first 5 seconds of the ad, the headline. Everything else you worry about later, because that is the context, the frame in which people consume it in. It's all about perception. The first 5 seconds of the ad are so important. You need to make sure, the same as a website, like we're talking about hero sections of websites here, is the exact same thing. The first 5 seconds, the place where people land, is so important. Humans read left to right, up, down, so you want to have your important information on the left. You sometimes see people putting the information on the right and the image on the left, and unless your image is really speaking something visually, then you should have your image on the right, and make sure that you're abundantly clear. 80% of your time, 80% of your advertising dollar should be focused on your headline. So when someone lands on your site, you need to capture their attention in the first 5 seconds. They need to know why they're here, what this is, or their bounce. And speaking of bouncing, we're going to talk about your numbers and your analytics and that in a bit, but your bounce rate is basically the percentage of people that land on your site and leave straight away. And believe it or not, an average bounce rate is usually like 50%. That's 50% of people bouncing. We do actually have a load of sites where the bounce rate's more like 10, 20% because we know how to retain people and we've got these things that I'm teaching you right. But in general, a lot of people have a bounce rate of like 80, 90%. And in some industries, that's considered good. You need to be crystal clear who you are, what you do, and what problem you can solve for your customer. I mean, the hero section and the headline of your website is literally like the hook for your ad. It's so important. It's your customer's first point of contact with you, and you need to get this right. And reason 2 is too many places to click. I had a customer come to me recently and ask me if I could identify the problem with her site. She had an e-commerce website, so I clicked on it, I went on it, and within 2 seconds I knew the problem. There were so many places to click. There were like 2 header buttons, 10 nav items. Each of the nav items, you would hover on them, a drop down will come up with 20 more items, 2 hero buttons, a click and collect banner. There were all sort of items to click on, and to be honest, stuff like this is the only exception where we'll break our rule, which is no hamburger menus on desktop. Sometimes you do want to tuck that information away, especially if this is like a marketing landing page and you really just want to drive people towards the call to action. I mean, think of it this way. If there's a straight road, a mile long, let's say, and it has 16 exits, and you tell someone to travel up it randomly and just take whichever exit, go whichever way they want, there is a 1 in 17 chance they're going to make it to the end. But if you send them up a road that's exactly the same with no exits, it is 100% guaranteed they're going to make it to the end because that's their only option. So yeah, just give people 1 place to click, or 2, just not too many, don't confuse people. And reason 3, believe it or not, your touch points are too far away. Now this absolutely blew my mind when I first heard about it, but obviously 95% of people are viewing your site on their phone, and we know that for sure from our analytics and our numbers, which we're going to cover later. But think about someone holding their phone, yeah? So if I'm holding my phone, all right, like this, my thumb, 90% of people are right-handed, right? So I got my thumb literally does not reach this top left corner. So it's way more difficult for people to touch stuff up there. So if you put your main call to action in the top left corner, it's very unlikely people are gonna click it because people are lazy. They're just scrolling with their hand. They don't actually want to take their hand off and have to like rearrange their phone to click up there. So this is like a #1 rule in UI UX design is you put the things you want people to tap in an easily accessible place next to their thumb. And the same goes for if you don't want someone to touch something, just put it in the top left corner. Like, you need to think about how easy it is for people to actually take the action you want them to take. Especially if you're like laying in bed like this and you've literally got your phone in one hand and you're scrolling. No, there are very, very few people that are gonna like sit up, take their hand away from their face and grab their phone just to move their thumb into the top left corner to accept your offer. And #4 is you're not showing up on Google. And you probably know you're not showing up on Google, and if you don't, you should definitely be checking. I actually have a sick tip here, which is if you go into Google search and you do site, and then your domain, you can literally see all of your site's listings on Google. So you don't have to like search and scroll through and hope you find yourself. And if you don't find yourself, is it because I'm not on Google or because I just didn't show up for this search listing? So Google literally has a bot that crawls your site, right? And this does go back to context and your headline and all that, because Google is literally reading these headlines and all of that to work out what your site is. And the way that Google shows you to people is based on relevance. How relevant are you to what the person searched for? So Google's bot goes and crawls your site and it's ranking you on all sorts of different factors. Page speed, which is how long your site takes to load. Accessibility, which is how accessible your site is for people with vision impairments that use screen readers and all that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure that your images have alt tags, your page loads quickly. They're also ranking you on best practices. So like, are you making sure that all your touch points are accessible and big enough, and using WebP images to make sure that you don't slow the person's browser down. There's loads of things to take into an account. And if you want to check this, you can do a Lighthouse test. Lighthouse will give you insights into each of these best practices, SEO, accessibility, and page speed. But you can also use Ahrefs. You can run a free audit and it will tell you all of the SEO problems with your site and how to fix them. There's loads of things Google take into account. Dark mode, I mean, there's actually a setting on people's computers where they can do prefers reduced motion, which means they don't like animations. So if you're showing animations to people that prefer reduced motion, Google is very unlikely to show you. So you really need to work out what Google's bot likes and try and do all those things. And the next tip, #5, is big walls of text. I go on so many people's websites and just find big blocks of text, and I always tell them that people aren't going to read that. Their brain tells them that that is a big commitment, and most people just aren't going to read it, especially when people are scanning online. Now, a good way around this, because most people say to me, well, what do I remove? All the information's important. And if all the information really does turn out to be important, you can keep it. You just need to make it more digestible, break up the paragraphs, use bullet points, use icons, make cards, anything. Just use your layout and utilize your layout to make the information more digestible. The easier it is for people to actually consume your information, and a lot of the time people are just going to scan headlines. So if your headlines need to make sense on their own, they need to have enough context on their own, because plenty of people aren't going to read the text and are going to just read the headlines. So make sure your headlines are clear. The same as we spoke about earlier in the second tip or whatever it was in the hero section. That's not the only important headline. All your headlines need to be clear. And our bonus tip, contact forms. Over 50% of marketers say that their #1 source of leads is their contact form. And trust me, I can say the same. Our #1 source of leads is our contact form, and still loads of people don't have one. They just have a phone number or an email address. And if somebody is clicking on your email address and they don't have their email client set up, or they're not on their phone, this is another thing that subconsciously their brain's going to say that this is a lot of effort and they don't want to do it. Whereas if you have a contact form, people are going to fill that out and you can get exactly which information you want from them. Now, another problem with people's contact forms is using placeholder values as labels. There's actually a statistic that shows that if you use placeholder values as labels, people will start typing. And now because they've started typing, the placeholder has disappeared, and they might leave and come back and they forget what they're typing in. And again, subconsciously, they decide this is a big commitment and they stop. So you need to make sure you have a contact form that's easy to use, get this to send directly to your email, and you can still have your email and your phone number and any method of contact you want there, but I promise you the contact form is going to be the #1 way that people contact you. You need to make sure you have a decent auto response, so when people send the message, they actually know that the message got sent. And another thing here, if you want to go the extra mile with your auto response, in our auto response, we show people our portfolio, our reviews, we link to our Instagram, and we just show them other stuff they might want to see to like further cement the decision they just made. And the same goes for the thank you page. When people fill out your form, it needs to be clear that the form actually submitted. Obviously the auto reply contributes to this, but so does the thank you page. Have people land on a thank you page. You can give them whatever information you want there. You can just thank them. It's up to you how elaborate you want to be with it. And then just have a button that goes back to website. Having a thank you page also makes it much easier for you to track your leads, because if you have your lead trigger as the URL equals thank you, that means anyone that arrives on the thank you page is going to be accredited as a lead. Whereas if you have your lead triggered by a form submission, that is way more complicated to set up and actually way less reliable. And there you have it. That's the 5 tips that are going to help you take your website from not making you any money to being your biggest tool and salesman for your business. And just to reiterate, that's more questions than answers. You aren't clear. There's too many places to click and you're just overwhelming people. Your touch points are too far away, so people can't reach them with their thumb like I showed you on my phone earlier. You're not showing up on Google for one of many reasons. You have big walls of text that people just don't want to commit to reading. And the last bonus tip was make sure you have a decent contact form with decent labels and don't use placeholder values as labels.
If you want to get more free value like this from me, you can sign up for my free newsletter on the Island Web Design website. I'm just giving away the value at this point, sharing everything I'm learning building this web design agency. Thanks for watching and make sure you subscribe for more.